Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Secret Invasion. Let's talk about it. The Secret Invasion is the latest MCU/Disney Plus series, and this one is centered on one of the more iconic MCU characters that we've ever gotten, and that is of course Nick Fury, as he's portrayed by Samuel L. Jackson. Now, I was really excited going into this series, particularly because of the trailers, because I felt like the trailers gave us this tone of like a spy thriller drama that I was really excited to see the MCU delve into once again, especially because one of my favorite MCU projects of all time, and I'm sure many of you guys agree, is Captain America and the Winter Soldier. That film did the spy thriller genre so well within the context of this franchise, and it remains one of the very best that the MCU has ever produced. And so to see that this series was taking inspiration from that for its tone and even for its advertising, I saw the tweets that came out, on Twitter, what's formerly known as Twitter, whatever. Don't even get me started on that. I had a bunch of tweets from the Secret Invasion PR team that looked like they were redacted, and it looked all very, ominous and official and just on theme with the actual show. So it was all very exciting, just taking a look at the trailers and the ad campaign, and also the fact that this genre fits so well with the main character of the show, Nick Fury. I mean, he's the ultimate spy. He was one of the highlights of Captain America the Winter Soldier, where we really got to see what he's capable of, and so it makes perfect sense to tie in that genre with this character. It all made for a very interesting package going into the show. I watched it, and in typical MCU Disney Plus fashion, the first episode got me. The first episode, took hold of me, and I was invested. I won't say it was the strongest first episode that we've ever gotten from a Marvel Disney Plus show, but it was definitely one of the strong episodes of the series, that's for sure. And so it was just enough to captivate me and get me invested for the rest of the episodes. But as the episodes dropped weekly, I started to realize that there wasn't quite as much as I wanted there to be in this show. Overall, guys, I have to say, unfortunately, it saddens me to say this, we have another flop on our hands. I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, Secret Invasion joins the ranks of the disappointments in the post-Endgame MCU roster. And I don't know what is going on. It's just been this like roller coaster ride recently that is just so unexpected for me as a Marvel fan who has enjoyed almost a completely consistent excellence for the last 15 years. So this is like new to me. But I guess it's like supporting a football team or like any sports team, right? Like, you congratulate them when they do well, and you share your commiserations when they don't. Like, you have to be in it for the for the long haul. And I'm just so used to the MCU winning that like I'm kind of fumbling a little bit, but we'll get through this. Like, I still have faith that we'll get through this. Like, we will. Like, we have to. But before we dive into my thoughts on Secret Invasion, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into my thoughts on Secret Invasion. But to start us off, I have a fun question for you guys. Ooh, and that is, do you believe in aliens? Do you believe in aliens? I find it so funny, hilarious, beyond hilarious, that on the day that the Secret Invasion finale was released, we found out that there may be aliens on this planet. Like, I just found that so hilarious that the, Congress hearing took place on that same day, and all sorts of things were revealed about UFOs and non-human bodies and whatnot on the day that Secret Invasion was released. I was like, this is the most elaborate marketing scheme I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, Marvel's really trying to make up for the shortcomings of this show by distracting us with this news. news. That is hilarious. And that, of course, leads me to the premise of this series, which closely ties into the events of Captain Marvel, which introduced us to a species of aliens called Skrulls. And the Skrulls were at war with the Kree, and they were forced to leave their home, and they were basically like space refugees, and some of them landed on Earth in the 90s. And during that time, Nick Fury had promised them that he would try and find a place for them to live, for their people to seek refuge in, because they couldn't stay on Earth. And so they came up with this deal where essentially Nick Fury would use them for their capabilities, use them for their shape-shifting abilities, their abilities to take on other people's forms and their memories and all of their information. That was a very valuable skill to him as a, young officer in S.H.I.E.L.D. at that point. And he was able to make use of that and, bolster his career and, rise up in the ranks until he became the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. But in exchange, the deal always was for him to seek out other planets and other places where the Skrulls could seek refuge and could settle down in. But unfortunately, as the events of this series show, Nick Fury was unsuccessful in that mission, and he failed to help the Skrulls in the way that he promised he would. And so over the decades, the Skrulls began to realize that Nick Fury wasn't as reliable and trustworthy as they thought, and he wasn't going to make good on his word anytime soon. And so they split up into factions, and some of them were led by Talos, and he was of course Nick Fury's friend who we're introduced to in Captain Marvel, and he believed that Nick could help the Skrulls and he would find somewhere for them to settle. Like, he actually trusted Nick to do so. But then over the years, you had another faction that started brewing, and they became led by Gravik, who's portrayed by Kingsley Benadir, and essentially they had become disenchanted with Nick Fury's promises. They'd done all of the dirty work that he'd asked of them but hadn't seen anything in return, and so they came up with their own plan of infiltrating Earth secretly. Some may even call it a secret invasion. Roll credits. They basically invaded Earth secretly by taking over the bodies of some incredibly powerful, important people on the planet, and they essentially came up with this plan to create a World War III where the great powers of the world would obliterate themselves. Okay, just eviscerating humankind and leaving behind the perfect place for the Skrulls to settle. So this series is all about Nick Fury returning to Earth from where he was, up in space in the, I think, Sword, Shield, Saber. I think it's Saber actually. Yeah, it became Saber, right? The Saber headquarters that was like on a satellite orbiting the planet. He decided to come down and grace us with his presence once again, only to see that, it's a messed up situation. Okay, a lot is going on Earth post blip. But one thing in particular is that there seems to be this secret invasion that's happening by this faction of the Skrulls. And so he has to team up with Talos once again to sort out this mess that he himself created, and chaos ensues. But overall, we have all of the key players here. We have all of the chess pieces on the board, and it's up to Nick Fury and Nick Fury alone. No Avengers, no Captain Marvel, just Nick Fury. It's up to him to figure out how to move these pieces around. Who are his friends? Who are his allies? Who are his enemies? Who are the Skrulls? We shall find out. And so yeah, that's the premise. That's the premise of the show. I think I've done a pretty good job of summarizing it, if you don't mind me saying. Like, I think I've done a really good job. I think I nailed that. Now, it must be said that this entire storyline is, of course, an adaptation of the comics, the Secret Invasion comic book storyline. But as I often say here on this channel, I don't read the comics. I'm not familiar with the comic book story. But what I am familiar with, guys, what I am absolutely familiar with is the Secret Invasion storyline from Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. That was where I was first introduced to the Secret Invasion storyline. That is where I learned about the Skrulls, and I have to say, and I said this in my trailer reaction for this show, I have to say though, even after having watched the show, that Earth's Mightiest Heroes did it better. It did it so much better, and let me explain why. I think that's the best way for me to go through my issues with the show, is just to compare it to Earth's Mightiest Heroes to some extent. So first of all, even though, as I said, I was really excited about the tone of this series, because I love, you know, Captain America the Winter Soldier, I love Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I love it when the MCU gets, you know, grounded and dark and dirty, in the way that it can sometimes with these more earth-based characters, but also where you have that added layer of, you know, espionage. And basically, whenever you have the Winter Soldier whenever you have Bucky Barnes around, okay, that metal arm, you know it's gonna get good, you know it's gonna get juicy. And so I was looking forward to having some of that in this series, but I still had my hesitations about exploring the Secret Invasion storyline on this show. And the main reason why I was so skeptical is because, for me, from what I saw in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, one of the biggest draws of the Secret Invasion storyline is the fact that you get to play that guessing game of who's a Skrull, right? Like, who is a Skrull? Is it them? Is it them? Is it her? Is it him? The whole point of the game is that you're constantly trying to figure out who the Skrulls are using to infiltrate the Avengers, the planet. You know, that's the whole fun of the game. But the problem here is that the series doesn't want to include any of the major players in the MCU. It doesn't want to include the Avengers. It doesn't want to include Captain Marvel. Nick Fury keeps saying, like, oh, I have to take care of this myself. Like, this is my mission. This is my war. I have to do this myself. We'll get to that in a second as well. But as a result, we've kind of lost the fun of the game. And so we end up with these random people, like the fake Prime Minister of the UK, and, you know, some leader of the UN or NATO, or people who we just don't know and we don't have any emotional connection to, any relationship with, and they end up being Skrulls. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but who cares? Like, I wanted to see if Captain America was a Skrull. I wanted to see if Captain Marvel was a Skrull. I wanted to see Tony Stark be a Skrull, or using the new lot of Avengers, Sam Wilson or Doctor Strange. Like, that's what I wanted when it came to the stakes of the Secret Invasion storyline. I wanted the key players to be involved. And because we didn't get that, because they went down the Disney Plus route, we ended up with these, like, random people, with barring a few exceptions, like, okay, Everett Ross. And I like Everett Ross, don't get me wrong, like, I'm happy that Martin Freeman got the check, like, that's good for him, but that's not the same as getting, like, one of the Avengers to be revealed as a Skrull. And also, when that reveal was made in the first episode, it kind of set up this idea that there would be more, you know, grander reveals as the series went on, and we just never got that, with only one exception, which we'll talk about in a second. But for the most part, it was just these unknown characters, these throwaway characters that no one really cared about, being revealed as Skrulls, and they had key roles in governments and, you know, international organizations, but like, who cares? Like, again, the draw of Secret Invasion is to see how the Skrulls, you know, infiltrated organizations like the Avengers, got into the interpersonal relationships between the team members and affected their team dynamics. And that's where you get the intrigue, that's where you get the paranoia, that's where you get the sense of, like, you can't trust anyone and anyone could be a Skrull, and that's how you become invested in the Secret Invasion storyline. We've already had many storylines where someone is trying to take over the world, someone is trying to start World War III. Like, it's happening every Thursday. We don't care about that. What we care about is these Skrulls who have the ability to appear as anyone with everyone's memories and knowledge. We care about how they're able to infiltrate an organization that we actually are invested in and affect the team dynamics within. And so with that in mind, I actually think Marvel made a terrible error, a terrible misjudgment in approaching the Secret Invasion storyline this way. I think they've pretty much thrown away one of the most iconic Marvel kind of storylines from the comics, because they've decided to do it, you know, using this Disney Plus series, as opposed to investing an entire phase to do this. Because really, that's what it could have been. This could have been explored in an entire phase, you know, like phase 2 or 3 or something, where we would still get the standalone films and the sequels, Skrulls, but I don't know, something would be off, right? There'd be something that's just a little bit off, like a character is making a decision that seems out of character, it seems a bit bizarre, you can't quite put your finger on it, but something is definitely off about one of our beloved characters. And then it all reaches a crescendo in perhaps an Avengers movie at the end of the phase, where you see them working together as a team, but some people aren't being quite as cooperative as others. Again, something is off. And then perhaps, you know, Infinity War style, we have this big grand finale where it's revealed that a person is a Skrull, whether it be Captain America or whoever. Someone huge has to be a Skrull, okay? Like, that's one of the major, you know, moments in the comics and also in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. So you need to have that final scene where someone is revealed to be a Skrull, and then it's like, oh my goodness. And then the end game version, the part 2, would be figuring out how to deal with this, you know, secret invasion, figuring out how far it goes, and then you can start investigating like what international organizations have also been infiltrated. Is it NATO? Is it, you know, the World Health Organization? Like, who knows? And that's basically how you would build that paranoia and build that tension to see how far this alien invasion has gone. I think that as a tactic would have been so much better and would have served the secret invasion storyline from the comics so much better within the MCU. But the route that they went down, where they were like, oh, we want it to be this grounded, you know, spy thriller where Nick Fury has to save the day all on his own, like that sounds okay for another storyline for a Nick Fury comic, but that's not secret invasion. Like, that's not secret invasion. Yes, it has the word secret in it, but that doesn't mean that spy thriller would be appropriate for secret invasion. Secret invasion has stakes because it's the characters that we know and love who have been swapped over by these aliens, and we can't figure out who it is, but we start to see the cracks in the team start to form, and so we become suspicious and we start to wonder why our beloved characters are acting in the way that they are. That's the essence of secret invasion. I feel like they took the plot lines, they took the outline of the story and tried to shove it into this Disney Plus show, but they didn't realize that what really makes us invested is the characters and the relationships between those characters that are destroyed when the aliens take over. And speaking of relationships between characters that are destroyed, that brings me to the one kind of reveal, the one big-ish reveal that we got, where it was revealed that Rhodey is a Skrull. And I mean, first of all, I knew, I saw it coming. I saw it coming. And just, you know, going back to what I said about how I would set up the secret invasion storyline if we really wanted to go for it, in my version, like I said, it would be subtle. Like, throughout the phase, when you have the standalone films, there would just be something that's a little bit off, something that could make fans go, huh? But in the case of Rhodey in the show, he was just a completely different person. Like, he was so obviously out of character. And maybe I have to make a concession because, you know, kids watch this as well, so they wouldn't be able to get the subtleties and nuances in a character's behavior. But to me, it was just so obvious that he wasn't actually Rhodey, especially in the context of the show. Like, duh, he's going to be the Skrull. And it just wasn't very well done. And also, going back to what I said yet again, you know, the reason why moments like this in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and I'm sure the comics, are really hit is because you have that aspect of like betrayal and shock at seeing the teammates realize that they, you know, have been infiltrated by aliens and they're wondering where their actual teammate is. And so there's that relationship that you really care about. Whereas here, you know, Rhodey and Fury, I don't think have ever shared screen time together. Like, I don't think, what relationship is there here? You know, Rhodey and Fury have never been besties. If it was Rhodey and Tony, Do you see what I mean? Like, if it was Rhodey and Stark, then it's like, oh, you know, like if Rhodey's about to shank Stark for some reason, then it's like, oh my god, what is he doing? But, you know, Nick Fury and Rhodey have never really had a major relationship at all. So like, this was just essentially meaningless, very, very obvious. And I guess the one tie that they had together was the fact that they're both black men. But like, that's not, I mean, I get the brotherhood, like I get, but that's not really, it's not giving what needed to be gave, honestly. And another reason why I wasn't the biggest fan of this revelation was because of how ill-planned it was. Because now you have the showrunner saying that Rhodey has apparently, perhaps, he doesn't even know for sure, perhaps Rhodey has been a Skrull since Captain America Civil War. And that's just a disaster, because now, you know, on twitter.com, or sorry, x.com, you have people trying to figure out, like, you know, if there were signs that he was a Skrull, like, oh, like what he says here is proof that he may have been a Skrull or whatever. But in reality, there are no signs if you look back. Okay, nothing actually makes sense or lines up, because this wasn't properly planned. It's clearly something that they've thought of off the cuff, and so now it, you know, deeply affects his appearances in previous projects, and not in a positive way. It doesn't line up with how he interacted with the Guardians of the Galaxy during the Infinity War saga. It doesn't line up with how he spoke with Sam during Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Like, nothing actually makes sense, and you can bend and twist and turn the logic to try and fit this revelation, but because it wasn't planned from the beginning, it's never going to line up the way that it could have had they had an entire phase exploring the Secret Invasion storyline. Okay, so I'm done with this complaint. I'm done with complaining about how poorly they adapted the Secret Invasion storyline. Let's move on to the next problem that I had with this series, and that is, where's Captain Marvel? Where's Captain? I feel like she should be here. And listen, okay, again, Nick Fury looked me dead in my eyes. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, this is my mission. This is something I have to do by myself, okay? I can't call the Avengers. Everyone kept asking him, like, where are the Avengers? Just call them. He's like, no. I can't call the Avengers. I can't call Captain Marvel. I had to deal with this by myself. But then you get to the end of the series and it's not Nick Fury who's fighting directly with Gravik, the enemy, but rather Gaia, who has been imbued with the powers of all of the Avengers. Okay, and Captain Marvel and Ebony Maw, you know, Thanos' people, like, she literally has become this all-powerful being who has all of these different superpowers that have been poorly rendered in CG. And it's like, oh, but I thought it was personal. But I thought it was, I thought, Nick, like, I thought you had to be the one to fight Gravik, but you sent in a substitute. So like, what's the tea? You could have called Captain Marvel the whole time, because clearly if she had been there since day one, it would have been finished by lunch. Another issue that I had with this series was how it explored the theme of immigration. Now, you guys know me, okay? You guys know me. I love me some social commentary, some layered commentary in my media, especially when it's, you know, in a genre that seems disconnected, like, you know, the MCU and superhero stuff. I love it when they imbue it with some social commentary to kind of ground it into the real world and give us an important message. You know, I love that stuff. That's why I enjoyed Falcon and the Winter Soldier so much. And so here you have this tie-in with, you know, themes of immigration, because of course the Skrulls are refugees. They're running away from their planet, which is war-torn because they're fighting with the Kree over there, and so they've been stranded on Earth with nowhere else to go, and that's why they're seeking you know, help from Nick Fury to help them find somewhere else to settle. But the problem is that the show gets very confused about what its message of immigration actually is. Like, it gets very, very confused with what to do with this messaging and what position to land on, because in reality, in this story, the Skrulls are all refugees, but not all of them are good people. Okay, and quite a few of them are actually bad people. So you end up with this confusing case where you have, you know, Talos on the one hand, who is this like innocent immigrant, right? You know, he's an example of the good kind. He just wants to find somewhere else to live, and he entrusts Nick Fury with, you know, that task and that mission. But years have gone by and nothing has helped, nothing has worked, and so the people become disillusioned with Talos's methods and they turn to Gravik. And so he is tired of searching elsewhere. He wants to use Earth as the new home for the Skrulls, understandably, honestly. But that makes him a bad guy, because he's going to have to create World War III in order to make that happen and wipe out the humans from the planet. And so when you have a situation where both sides of this argument are Skrulls, both sides of this argument are refugees, but you have an example where the good side is Talos, but Talos has been proven wrong time and time again because he waited for Nick Fury to help them and Nick Fury failed to do so. And even now, when Talos is dead, Nick Fury still failed to do so. We'll talk about that in a second, but there's no solution to this, by the way. Like, there's no happily ever after, right? So the good immigrant was punished for believing in Nick Fury and believing in the institutions. So the immigration messaging has gotten lost. Like, the immigration messaging has gotten very, very confused. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to detangle all of these words, but like, nothing is making sense here. And as I just said, that of course ties into my next problem seamlessly, and that is that this series actually has no real resolution. Okay, so the writers got so jumbled up in their logic and their reasoning and so confused with this storyline that they forgot to write in a plausible solution to the problem of what to do with the Skrulls, because they do want somewhere to settle down. They do want somewhere to seek refuge openly without having to obscure themselves and, you know, live in hiding. And that was supposed to be Nick Fury's job, and now he's gone off again, off planet, and it's like, okay, well what now? Like what are we actually going to do? It's so bizarre that this series doesn't actually find a resolution for these problems, and Earth is kind of left in a worse state than when Nick Fury found it, because now everyone knows that the Skrulls are around and they're super you know, suspicious of everything. They're really angry and confused. There are whole riots going on and assassinations. And so in reality, Nick Fury has made the situation 10 times worse, and he doesn't seem to be equipped to deal with the consequences and the fallout of this. And we're just left here thinking like, oh, so what was the point of all of it? Like, literally, what was the point? Now, if I had to guess, I would say that the whole point of this, you know, the whole point of that finale in particular, is to do with that one line that Nick Fury said to the president after he made that incendiary speech to the whole world, where he said that's some, you know, real one-term type bleep, okay? And that's a really interesting line to me, because I think it insinuates that that president isn't going to be president for much longer, and perhaps that would tie into Captain America Brave New World, where the US has a brand new president. I think that might be what they're trying to set up. But to sacrifice a satisfying and like logical conclusion to this series for the sake of setting up Captain America Brave New World, if my theory is correct, would be such an abysmal position. Like, that is such a bad idea, because now I just feel like this show is so pointless, and I genuinely don't understand like what we've gotten out of it. But what I can tell you is what we have lost on the way. Yes, that brings me to the next thing that I really disliked about the show: the fact that we lost some really great characters for no apparent reason. I cannot believe they killed off Maria Hill for this. Really? No. no, this can't be true. And yes, it made for a bombastic ending to the first episode of the show, but seeing what followed, it's just like, it wasn't even worth it. It wasn't even worth it. I want them to scrap this. I want them to ignore what happened and just bring her to the next the next movie or something, because I need to wipe this from my brain. What a waste of a character. I like the fact that she was always there. She was never a prominent character. Like, I'm not one of those people that's acting like she was one of my faves or anything, but it was nice that she was there. You know, it was like Nick Fury and Maria Hill, like they were always together. To think that they sacrificed her for this series, which in the end just didn't even end up hitting, is just like, it's the big shame, okay? And the same thing applies to Talos. I was really upset that they got rid of Ben Mendelsohn's Talos, because truly for the first few episodes of the show, the friendship between Talos and Nick Fury was the only thing keeping me together, was the only thing keeping me going week after week, honestly. Like, I just did not care about anything else. I had lost interest in the plot a while ago, but at least I got to see Ben Mendelsohn and Samuel L. Jackson with their friendship develop throughout the series, and we get an exploration of what happened prior. Like, that to me at least gave me, again, that personal connection that I became invested in. And so to see that they killed him off was just, I couldn't think of a worse decision. Like, that friendship was literally one of the only bright spots of the show, and then they extinguished the light and I was just left in the darkness. But side note, if I could just put my shipping cap on, you guys know how much I love to ship, okay? But I think if we were in a fair and just and sensible world, I believe that Nick Fury and Talos being together would have been canon. Listen. listen, okay, but you know what I'm talking about. If this world wasn't so prejudiced and boring and discriminatory, I think that Nick Fury and Talos would have absolutely been a couple, and it would have made sense for the story, and it would have raised the stakes for their relationship. But instead they're friends, and like, okay, fine. It would have made more, okay. It would have made more sense. Now I'm invested. It would have made more sense if Talos was in love with Nick Fury and was willing to give it all up to back Nick Fury, including going against his own people. Do you see what I mean? Like, that would have made more sense in the context of this story. But instead they gave Nick Fury a wife, which we'll talk about in a second. But I generally think if it wasn't for discrimination, hatred, prejudice, whatever, they would have been a couple, 100%. And the on-screen chemistry that they had would have pulled it off 1,000%. So we lost that. We lost the opportunity to explore that, but whatever. And not only did we lose that, but we lost the character of Talos completely, which I am vehemently against. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the issues that I had with the show, let's talk about some of the good stuff, because there was, you know, some decent stuff in there. I did watch it week to week, like I didn't give it up, so there must have been something, right? Well, I mean, first of all, I just said, you know, Ben Mendelsohn, whenever he was on screen, I was there. I was invested. I was 100% with it. And so it was a travesty that they decided to kill him off halfway through. Like, I struggle to think of a worse decision in a TV show, honestly, at this moment. Like, oh, it was really bad. Another bright spot in the series was, interestingly enough, Talos' counterpart, Gravik, who was portrayed by Kingsley Ben-Adir. Kingsley Ben-Adir was so freaking brilliant. So brilliant. Okay, like, he was just so good, and I just really liked the story that they set up for him. You know, the fact that he was a kid when Nick Fury made those promises, and then essentially Nick Fury used him as, like, not necessarily a child soldier straight away, but because of how he looked up to Nick Fury at that point in his life, Nick Fury definitely took advantage of him to be a part of his own, like, secret service, and he used his ability to get, you know, ahead and get what he wanted. And then, you know, Gravik growing up so that his people didn't get any of what Nick Fury had promised, and he became angrier and he became a revolutionary. And on top of that, you hear that Gravik was part of this special operation to get the harvest, which was, you know, a bunch of the Avengers and Thalos's people and all of that blood. And this, of course, had the ability to create the Super Skrull, which Gravik wanted to use to his advantage. But again, it just shows how Nick Fury kept taking and taking and taking and not giving anything back. And essentially, Nick Fury went to Tony Stark's school of creating your own villains. So the backstory of the character is really, really compelling. The fact that they rooted the story in London town, you guys know I love it when London pops up on TV or in films, but not just anywhere in London town, mind you. They rooted this origin story in Brixton, which is in South London, and that is where a lot of the Caribbean community during the Windrush generation migrated to when they moved to London. And so it does have that kind of cultural history to it that is really perfectly tied into the theme of immigration on the show. And so I immediately recognized, you know, what they were trying to do with having this be set in Brixton. And it's just a shame that they fumbled the bag when it came to the theme and got in knots with how to actually make sense of it. But all of those problems that the writers faced had nothing to do with Kingsley Ben-Adir, who was there to give the performance of a lifetime. Like, he was there to knock it out of the park, and knock it out of the park he did, particularly with that grand monologue that he had in the finale that summed up all of his woes, all of his issues with Nick Fury. I thought that was brilliantly delivered. And actually, I got annoyed during the finale because, you know, he was saying this monologue, it was so powerful, it was so convincing, but then the cameraman or the camera person kept flitting back and forth to like all these different angles, to the corner of the room, to a window, to someone's foot. Like, it was just so random. And usually, you know, these camera angles are supposed to introduce dynamicism. They're supposed to make things feel interesting and investing. But in that moment in time, the director should have recognized that the power was already in Kingsley Ben-Adir's performance. They didn't need to distract with these weird camera angles. It just cheapened the moment and distracted us from what he was saying. And so they really should have sat with him and let his performance breathe, and perhaps gotten some shots of, you know, Nick Fury's reactions. But if you watch that scene again, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. The camera work was just so random and bad, just uncharacteristically awful, in that it really cheapened what could have been an even more powerful moment on the show. Another standout on the show was Olivia Colman as Sonia. I loved this character, and I really hope that they bring her back in a future project. I thought she was absolutely brilliant. I loved the juxtaposition between her, you know, seemingly sweet, innocent manner versus the horrors that she was doing. Okay, the crimes against humanity that she was committing, especially against these Skrulls. Like, I loved that juxtaposition in the character, and I think Olivia Colman delivered it brilliantly, especially because she does have that like high-pitched voice that is very unassuming. Like, you think she's a sweet older lady, but in reality she'll like chop you up into bits and stuff you into a walk-in freezer. So yeah, hopefully they make use of Olivia Colman's Sonia in future projects. I actually kind of wish that she was playing Valentina de la Fontaine, Allegra, etc. and so forth, the character that's portrayed by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I wish Olivia Colman was portraying that character instead. But maybe they can be like counterparts. Like, maybe that could be explored, where they're essentially both in the grey zone when it comes to morality and ethics, but Valentina is more outrightly evil and Sonia is more ish on the side of good. So like, they're a really good counterpart, and hopefully Marvel remembers to do something with them. My hopes aren't high, but like, hopefully Marvel remembers that they have two characters that have this interesting dynamic. And then lastly, we have Gaia, or Gia herself, who's portrayed by Emilia Clarke, and I thought she was pretty, you know, good. Honestly, before the finale, I thought she was good, but then after the finale and seeing that awkward, you've seen the picture of the arm, the awkward CGI, and how she was manifested as this all-powerful being with everyone's superpowers and blah blah blah. Basically all the stuff that She-Hulk warned us about. Remember when She-Hulk told us that that kind of finale would have been ridiculous, that it's not really what we wanted because we've seen it time and time again? Yeah, well, turns out she was right. Okay, we should have listened to She-Hulk because we got that finale again for Secret Invasion and it just did not hit the way that it needed to. And so, you know, I unfortunately before the finale I had a better impression of Emilia Clarke's performance, but then after it I've just like soured on the character entirely. I don't like the way that she was used here. I think even like before the finale she was pretty bland, if I'm being honest. But again, it was her relationship with her father, you know, Talos, that really brought meaning to the character and an emotional core to the character. But as soon as Talos left the picture, she just became blander than ever. And yes, technically she wanted to avenge her father and her mother, who was killed by Gravik, but because Talos wasn't there to be that emotional core, it just did not hit the same. But she ends up walking off into the distance with Sonya in the end, and that makes little to no sense, really. It's basically exactly the same deal that Talos made with Nick Fury, and that didn't work out for him, so like, why would it work out for Gia or Gaia, whatever her name is? And she even points this out to Sonya, but then Sonya's like, well, the difference is that there's no personal relationship between us. But in my mind, that just makes it even worse because you have no loyalties between you either. So that was just dumb if you think about it. And of course, when it comes to the good parts of the series, you have Samuel L. Jackson returning to portray the iconic Nick Fury, and that's always a good thing. I think it's great that Nick Fury got his own project to shine in within the MCU. I mean, he is a GOAT, and so I love that aspect of it. But again, I just don't think that the Secret Invasion storyline was best suited for this. I think the Secret Invasion storyline needed some bigger stakes, you know, some bigger players in it. And with all due respect to Nick Fury, he did need the Avengers, okay? He did need Captain Marvel. He did need the Avengers for this to matter. It just didn't make sense for them to be absent. So they should not have done this in a Disney Plus show. But in terms of Samuel L. Jackson's acting, like, he's Samuel L. Jackson, like he's not going to do a bad job, duh. And also you had the revelation that Nick Fury was married to a Skrull. We could have had that same revelation if he was married to Talos, I'm just saying. But, you know, that was fun, you know, seeing his wife and the fact that his wife technically betrayed him. Again, there's mixed messaging when it comes to the immigration theme, because his wife technically betrayed him and turned to the rebels, and then was about to assassinate him, but then they, you know, changed each other's minds. It's a bit iffy, but either way, in the end, they kind of walk off into the distance back to the Saber headquarters to figure some stuff out, hopefully, and you know, that's fine. Because it's over, it's fine. It's done now. So with all of that being said, guys, I'm going to be giving Secret Invasion a 5.5, 6. We'll say 5.5. I'm going to give Secret Invasion a 5.5 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Secret Invasion, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.